Good day, everyone. Today, I will share to you the Ancient Egyptian Civilization Part 1. Ancient Egypt lasted for over 3,000 years from 3150 BC to 30 BC. It was located along the Nile River in northeast Africa. Its boundaries are the Sahara Desert to the west, the mountainous Eastern Desert and Red Sea to the east, and Mediterranean Sea to the north. Also, cataracts to the south. Ancient Egyptians were reasonably free from invaders. From about 5000 BC, when climate became arid, nomadic groups retreated to the Nile River Valley. Along Nile River, the longest river in the world. Egypt's early settlers called their land Kemet, which means black land, named after the rich black soil found in the Nile's floodplain. They created the first urban settlements, which concentrated in the north and the south of Egypt. The Lower Egypt in the north and the Upper Egypt in the south. They were named after the flow of the Nile River. As time went by, settlements became independent cities, and soon the first rulers began to emerge. Pharaoh was the king or queen of Egypt. The word Pharaoh means great house, which is a reference to the place where the Pharaoh resides. He was the head of the government and high priest of every temple. The people of Egypt considered the Pharaoh to be a half man, half god. The first true Pharaoh of Egypt was King Narmer, sometimes called Menes. He became the first king of First Egyptian dynasty. Did you know that he united Lower Egypt, known as Red Crown, and the Upper Egypt, known as White Crown? As a result, Egypt became known as the Double Land, or the two lands of Upper and Lower Egypt. He founded Memphis, the first capital of Egypt. The unification marked the beginning of Egyptian civilization. Furthermore, it gave Egypt the control of the entire Nile River. Let us see how Egypt thrived as it was called the gift of the Nile. Meanwhile, ancient Egyptians settled and built their houses along both banks of Nile River using mud and straw. Wood was not used much in buildings due to its scarce availability. Most houses had at least 3 rooms and flat roofs, which formed part of the living area. Poor ancient Egyptians often lived in single-room houses, while the homes of wealthy and noble classes were large. Did you know that in order to benefit from the Nile, the farmers figured out how to cope with the river's annual rising and falling on the Nile? They began to build dikes to keep the flood waters out of the town. They constructed basin irrigation to capture and hold the water after floods receded. They also constructed canals so they could control the flow of water and built reservoirs to hold water supplies. Over time, they also invented shadoof, which could be used to raise and move water from rivers onto the land. As early as 5,000 years ago, the farmers also learned to measure the height of Nile flooding using nilometer. The ancient Egyptians based their farming around the annual flooding of River Nile. In order to know when to plant and harvest, they needed to track days and observe all the heavenly bodies. Egyptians developed a calendar using papyrus reeds. It contained a year composed of 365 days divided into 12 months with 30 days each. Meanwhile, they divided their calendar up to 3 seasons. Aket, the time of flooding of the Nile, Peret, the growing season, and Shemu, the harvest season. In addition, Aket was also called the season of inundation. During the period of the flood, Egyptian farmers spent the time mending, making tools, and looking after the animals. Many farmers work for the Pharaoh. Moreover, Peret was also called the season of the emergence. As soon as the flood began to recede, the ancient Egyptians plowed the fertile soil ready for sowing. They had both hand plows and ones pulled by oxen. Seeds were then sown into newly plowed soil. After that, goats and other animals walk over the fields to push the seeds onto the ground. Farmers were able to plant wheat, barley, flax, and other fruits and vegetables. Now, Shemu, also called the season of the harvest. After the crops grew and ripened, farmers used wooden sickles to cut crops and then separated the grains from the shaft. The grains were then divided into portions to pay government taxes, to pay the laborers, and the rest to the owner of the land. The government took their portions and stored in large silos and grain bins. Over time, the farmers of ancient Egypt were able to produce large surplus, more food than they needed. This enabled some people to have specialized jobs other than farming. Many of them set up workshops and became craft workers. Did you know that the ancient Nile was teeming with fish such as tilapia, perch, and catfish? They fished using bronze and copper hooks, metal harpoons, and fish nets. Moreover, the Nile River was also used to transport people and goods. They traded gold, papyrus, linen, and grains for cedar wood, copper, iron, and the like. With this, the Egyptians became boat and ship builders. Furthermore, their earliest ship were skiffs made of bundles of papyrus reeds tied together. Later on, the Egyptians made large wooden rafts with oars. They also developed sails. Ancient Egyptians thought it was important to write down information of important events. Around 3100 BC, the ancient Egyptians invented one of the earliest known writing systems. The symbols they used were called hieroglyphics, which comes from the Greek word meaning sacred carving. Hieroglyphics were written on papyrus, were carved on painted on stone monuments, tombs, and temples. Scribes were people in ancient Egypt who learned to read and write. For many years, historians were unable to read hieroglyphics, but in 1799, a stone table was found by Jean-Francois Champollion that had a message carved on it of both Greek and hieroglyphics. This was called the Rosetta Stone. It allowed many records from ancient Egypt to be read and translated. That's it for part 1. Let us continue the ancient Egyptian civilization in part 2. Thank you for listening.